I've spoken to over 40,000 students and new grads, and they are confused as hell when it comes to what student loan repayment option should they choose. And the government doesn't make this any easier because of the myriad of options that they give you. All the blogs out there telling you this or that, social media telling you this or that. And then on top of that, you go to your loan servicer who's supposed to help you and they got no idea what they're doing either. Well, don't worry, today I'm gonna walk you through exactly how to choose which student loan repayment option to choose. And those of you that have subscribed to our channel and watch us frequently or listen to our podcast, you always hear me say this when you're choosing a financial product or a financial option. You gotta ask yourself 5 questions. What are the advantages, disadvantages? What are the risks? How do I mitigate the risk? And what are my alternatives? And that is what we're going to apply to this conversation today about choosing which student loan repayment option is right for you. So first and foremost, I'm actually going to jump all the way to question number 5. What are my alternatives, right? I want to make this easy for you when it comes to student loan repayment options. Like if you go on to studentaid.gov or your loan servicer, you're going to see like 10, 11, there's so many different options on there, okay? Really from a financial planning standpoint, what you have to decide is which financial planning student loan repayment strategy am I going to follow? The strategies are only 2 when it comes to federal loans. Either you're going to be doing a payoff student loan repayment option or you're going to be doing a loan forgiveness option. And when I say loan forgiveness, you might see these acronyms like pay as you earn, income-driven repayment plans, income-based repayments, all that type of stuff. But those are your 2 options. So the first things that we are going to compare are those 2. Those are your 2 alternatives. And then once you decide which way to go, then we'll dive deeper into that. So let's jump into it. The first of the 5 questions you got to ask is, what are the advantages? And that's what most people always answer, and that's all they answer. They don't even look at the other questions. But that's where we're going to start off at. When it comes to your first student loan repayment option, and that is paying off your student loans, the advantage is that it's simple. I make this monthly payment for this amount of time. I pay off my debt. Very simple, okay? Now, if you look at income-driven repayment plans, the advantage is the monthly payment is a lot lower than paying off your loan for the majority of borrowers. So the advantage, again, pay off loans, simpler. Income-driven repayment plans, most of the time we're going to have a lower required payment. Now the next question becomes, what are the disadvantages of both of these student loan repayment options? Now, when it comes to paying off your loan, the primary disadvantage is that you have your money going to pay that off. It's more of like an opportunity cost, whereas you could say, look, maybe if I go on to this other plan, I can use that money to buy a car, I can use that money to save for a house, I can use the money for whatever else you want to. So the disadvantage of the payoff strategies is that you have a higher required monthly payment and you forego that money somewhere else. The disadvantage of the income-driven repayment plan are actually a pretty long list. I'm going to go only hit on a couple. But the primary ones with that student loan repayment option is that you have a tax liability at the end of it. So that's number 1. Number 2 is your monthly payment changes. Now that can be a disadvantage or an advantage. It's a disadvantage because if your income's going up, your monthly payments are going to go up as well. But it's also an advantage because it should be affordable. But also if you lose your income, you can also drop your required monthly payment, right? So that's an advantage and a disadvantage. Now, the other disadvantage on an income-driven repayment plan is if you're married or getting married, now you got to figure out how do you file your taxes, because then it's going to affect what your required payment's going to be on that student loan repayment option. But also it's going to affect how you do your investments in things like a Roth IRA. Okay, so if you want to compare like high level, so far the payoff student loan repayment options are simpler, but the disadvantage is that you give up some money that you can use somewhere else. The income-driven repayment plan, the advantage is that the monthly payment's a lot cheaper, but to sum up the disadvantages, it's a lot more complex than the payoff option. So then that leads to our third question. What are the risks of each one of these? Now, you have to identify risk. I'm huge on managing your risk. We always say that. Manage your risk, your return will be there, okay? When it comes to paying off your loans, again, it's actually the risk is basically the same thing as the disadvantage. is opportunity cost. You're not using that money to invest somewhere else. You're using it to pay off your debt, which is not a good thing or it's not a bad thing. That's just the risk that you have to identify. When it comes to the income-driven repayment plan, the primary risk is the first disadvantage we talked about. What is the tax going to be? Okay. Now, there is a second risk that most people don't ever think about, and that is that the loan servicers mess up the required payment on those income-driven repayment plans all the time. So even though your payment might be supposed to be like $200, they might be charging you $500 or $600. Okay, so that is a massive risk. So then that leads to the fourth question. I've identified these risks. How do I reduce them? So when it comes to paying off your loans and using that student loan repayment option, the way you can reduce the risk of saying, hey, I'm foregoing money in terms of investing is a couple different ways. First and foremost, you can still make sure that in your financial plan, you're getting minimums towards investments. So minimum things to get like your retirement match, minimum of like $50 a month going to your Roth IRA. So that way you are having some money invested there. The other way is to really say, hey, if I do this in my financial plan, am I really giving up something in the long term by not investing or not? So, for example, if you're a FitBUX member listening to this or watching this, then you already know you can build one plan where you're paying off your loans but aggressively investing versus paying off your loans and aggressively paying them off and then investing afterwards, and you can compare the two. So if you're looking at that and you're strategically planning that, then that helps mitigate the risk. Where people fall into problems is where they just blindly choose one way or the other and they don't really have a reason for it, okay? So that's how you mitigate the risk on the student loan repayment option of paying off your loans. Now, what about the repayment option for income-driven repayment plans? The primary way you reduce the risks is, one, knowing how they work. That's the big one. The second one is setting up a savings plan for that tax liability. Okay, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes again, but you got to set up a savings plan, right? Require a minimum amount to save. The third part of that, with that monthly payment, is knowing what your payment should be, which, you know, of course I'm biased. Like I want everybody to use our tools and our technology at FitBUX, because we incorporate all these different things that go into that monthly payment so you can check what it is. But there's other calculators out there. I wouldn't necessarily use the studentaid.gov calculator or your loan servicers because there's bugs all over it. But there's some decent calculators out there. So have an idea of what that monthly payment should be in case your loan servicer messes it up. But that's one of the big things about reducing risk if you use the student loan repayment option of loan forgiveness, is identifying those risks to begin with. Just identifying them is going to help you reduce that. Now, the fifth question is the one that I actually started with. What are my alternatives, right? So when it comes to student loan repayment options, it's paying off my loans versus loan forgiveness. And you literally list the answers to those questions, and that's how you decide. Now, the next step is, well, what if I choose the student loan repayment option of paying off my loans? And then what if I choose loan forgiveness? So I'm going to deeper dive, asking those same questions again. Right, so now if I'm paying off my loans, I have to decide, what repayment option should I choose? What are my alternatives? So I could use like the standard plan, I can use the extended plan, I could refinance. Okay, so if I look at those alternatives, it's like, okay, well, if I stay in the standard plan, it's simple, it's a no-brainer type of thing. If I do the extended plan and drop my required payments, then that means that I have more budget flexibility. And I can target specific loans and pay them off faster. Or I could do something else with my money in the next 6 to 12 months on another goal. Once I hit that goal, I can come back and pay off my loans aggressively. So maybe you have credit card debt you want to pay off first and then pay off your student loans aggressively. You can do that. Let's just say I'm going to refinance. What's the advantage of that? Well, I can get a lower interest rate and save money. There's my advantages of my three options. Next question, what's the disadvantages? Well, if I stay in the standard 10-year plan, it's going to cost me the most because I'm not targeting specific loans. Plus, so then my second option of extending it, what's the disadvantage there? It primarily is a behavioral thing, because now you need to make the monthly payments. You need to make prepayments. And so if you're the type of person that's like, look, if my monthly payment's going to drop, and you not have the discipline and you know that about yourself to actually target specific loans and pay them off faster, then it's a disadvantage to do option B. You should stick with the first option, option A. Okay, but then that leaves the third option, refinancing. What's the disadvantage? When it comes to federal loans, you're going from a federal loan to a private loan. You give up a lot of flexibility there. Okay, so that is where you have to say, hey, am I saving enough to give up the benefits of my federal loans? Okay, so then we go to the third question. What are the risks? Okay, again, when it comes to the option A, the standard plan, or option B, dropping your required payment so you can target loans, it's the same risk. It's the opportunity risk that we had said before. We've already identified that. Refinancing, that's different because yes, you go from a federal loan to a private loan, but the other risks is within refinancing. What are the risks? So for example, we see people make the mistake where they go into the 5-year refinance loan all the time. And it's like, what are you doing? And it's like, well, it saves me the most money. But the problem is that it completely could destroy your budget because the monthly payment is so high, you lose budget flexibility. That could be a major risk to your financial plan. Okay? Which now leads to the fourth question. How do I minimize the risk? Again, for A and B, it's about having a good financial plan. We've already touched on that also. But when it comes to refinancing, this is where you strategically sit down, and we do this all the time at FitBUX with people, is do you use a 5-year refinance or do you use like a 20-year? Because the rate most of the time is not going to be that different. So if I use a 20-year, do I then turn around and say, okay, well, I can still make prepayments and pay it off fast, but I have budget flexibility. So that's how you identify that. And we've already talked about the fifth question, the alternatives. You know, which A, B, and C, standard plan, dropping my required monthly payment, refinancing. And again, you just look at those columns and say, which one do I want to do and which one fits within my financial plan of what I would like to do. All right, now let's just say you chose the student loan repayment option of loan forgiveness. Now you've identified one of the biggest risks of the tax liability. So now you have to go in and do the same exercise and say, well, how do I save for that tax liability? So that leads into the next question of,